Welcome back to the Contacts Coaching Podcast. We are joined today by Neil La Sala, recently retired after 39 years at Belmont. Not all of them were at Belmont. He'll clear that up. But anyway, he's recently retired athletic director, Belmont High School in the LA City Unified School District in the LA City section. Coach, thanks for being on today and joining us.
Thanks, Justin. It was fun the last time, and I'm thinking it's going to be fun again. I know those questions are yours. Wyatt Earp.
Let's do it then. Here we go. So,
all right.
Take us through your background as a coach. How did you end up coaching to begin with? What brought you into the profession? What are the various steps along the way? If you could help ground the audience in the background of how you ended up where you're at now and recently riding off into the sunset, so to speak.
Yeah, thanks. I never imagined I was going to be an athletic director, but coaching was what I always wanted to get into. I shared before, 10th grade. It was when I kind of heard the calling to go into education, to be a PE teacher, to be an athletic coach. That's where I got the inclination. Ended up at Cal State LA. Got a bachelor's there, a master's there, teaching credential, another master's later on through Concordia University. Coached a little bit when I was in college at a high school in the area. Coached a Frostsoft boys soccer team. Really enjoyed it. Kind of brought things full circle. Ended up at Roosevelt High School in East Los Angeles in 1985. I started my career there. Right away, as a young science and health teacher, I was the assistant athletic director at Roosevelt. And it was a learning experience. I wanted to get into coaching. There were no positions available to coach. So it wasn't until I moved to Belmont 8 years later, in 1990, the summer of 1994, that I actually, for the first time, after 8 years into my career, was given the opportunity to coach the girls' varsity soccer team. And that was for 12 seasons. That was really an experience that I enjoyed. I can't really put into words how much I enjoyed it. The whole idea of coaching girls was something that I never in my most wild imagination ever thought, because in the 70s when I was growing up and playing in soccer, playing in high school, playing at the youth level, there were very few girls that were involved in soccer. And we had one girl that came out from our team, and then she became injured and she couldn't stick with it. At my school, Temple City High School, I was part of the first team that was a CIF designated sport in 1977, be the winter of 1977. So it was kind of a pioneer experience. My brother and I, just a year apart, we had been teammates all the way up through youth sports into high school, baseball and soccer. And it was kind of neat being teammates with a younger brother, 11 months younger, and sharing a lot of common experiences, not just with him, but other kids that we grew up with. So these kinds of things, I think, what turned me into someone, along with my parents being educators, turned me into someone that wanted to pursue educational-based athletics, being a coach, and learning that there was more to it that meets the eye once you become a coach. The buttons you push on individual athletes just aren't necessarily the same buttons that you can push on every person. Developing people skills, being able to read a person, reading an athlete, and coaching girls, getting back to that, was something that I kind of felt kind of natural going into it because I think I had that ability early on to kind of read people and understand that certain buttons you can push to get the most out of them are will vary from person to person.
So do me a favor and follow up. So you did 12 years as the girls soccer coach. You've been I don't remember what year you started as the AD at Belmont, but can you just talk us through the different hats you've worn since 1994 at Belmont?
Sure. Started off with girls soccer, assistant athletic director. I was the ASB advisor for 3 years. That was a lot of fun. Kind of like being in high school again. You're involved in every little minute thing that goes on there on campus. Um, we had a program called Avid, which was a college prep program for students that really kind of focus on average in the middle kids with C and B grades, and to boost them up and get them A through G requirement savvy to get into a CSU or a UC school or above. So did that for a long time, was the yearbook advisor for 1 year, which was kind of a unique experience and that I enjoyed. And then had the opportunity when the athletic director retired to move into that office. And it was a teaching load. It's always been a teaching load associated with being athletic director. By and large, that's how Los Angeles Unified School District operates. There's some situations where there's small learning communities, and then they have a full-time AD who has other duties in addition to the athletic director's office. But always enjoyed being a teacher, teaching science, teaching health, teaching life skills. These were the kinds of things I think I signed up for. I did. Even when the days were hard, I always had to fall back into something that nobody, it's like when I joined the Marines, no one twisted my arm to do it. I did it on my own accord. I knew it wasn't going to be easy. I knew that there were going to be challenges all the time, but I did it nonetheless. So you just got to have the mindset and make the most of it.
Okay, so here's what I want to know. And traditionally, and this question is going to be great for you. The question is, what did you realize, given your preparation, right, leading into the job, that you realized right away you needed to figure out, right? You thought you were ready, but were never ready. And yours is unique, right? Because you made a comment that I'd love for you to go a little deeper on, is there wasn't any coaching opportunities. Does that mean like you weren't allowed to be a volunteer coach at that time? You couldn't, the district wouldn't allow beyond X number of people around them? But anyway, so you're this assistant AD for, I think you said 8 years, and then you become the head coach. So I'm even more interested in, you've done all the background work. You kind of know what's going on, and then you get into this role. Like, what kind of hits you out of left field right away, thinking you were ready, and then you weren't?
There was, I think my brain was my own worst enemy, because you always tend to go back to how it was when like you were an athlete competing and how your coaches were and so forth. And it was not easy for me to break away from that. I could easily come up with the drills and skills and figure out what kids needed, what the team needed. But there was always these assumptions that they came with some kind of skill level and knowledge already. So in an urban school district, in an urban setting, predominantly Hispanic students from Central America, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, some students from Mexico, some students from South America. In that setting, girls, and at the time in the era that I was coaching, girls typically didn't come with a lot of athletic prowess. Some did, I'm not going to say there was, but for the most part, they weren't coming from any kind of youth programs, any kind of club teams. So you were building from the ground level. And I think keeping it simple, teaching them basic skills, emphasizing things like restarts, indirect and direct free kicks, corner kicks, little things that a lot of coaches take for granted or they don't really emphasize during practice. But I felt I needed to, because what happens is those little things can make a difference. Novice players, especially in the sport of soccer, aren't always comfortable heading the ball. And we spent an inordinate amount of time doing head ball drills and working to the point where we became very good at it. And to the point where I had to come up with a lot of pizza parties because we won games, and the deal was, if we won a game where at least one of the goals was scored with a head ball, and I mean, then we had them throwing themselves all over the field, Justin, just to drill it into the back of the net, one head ball. But just from, these little things that you had to kind of, and then going back to what I said before, understanding the buttons that you need to push when it comes to certain athletes. The in the face yelling and screaming works great on some, doesn't work that well on others, especially girls. You have to retool, you have to go back, and you got to take a breath. I have a wife of 18 years that continues to remind me, Neil, this is not the Marine Corps.
Let me talk about that for a second. What value add do you think your time in the Marine Corps provided for you both as a teacher and as a coach and an administrator? And are there lessons that you can parse and share with me and the audience who we're allowing to listen to this conversation that we can learn and we could use without having to go into the Marine Corps? While I'm sure there are some people that, may be interested in that background, I'm at the place now at almost 50 years old where I'm not even eligible, but I would love to have some thoughts and some information from you in that regard.
Sure. Yeah, I retired from the Marine Corps Reserve in 2020. I did 31 years, 2 combat tours in Iraq. Teamwork, actually, it might try it, mundane. Teamwork is the number one thing, and getting people to do things that they normally wouldn't expect that they could do in themselves. So one of the things that I brought a lot into play was that every time they step on the field, they were making history for the school. So I was trying to build a mindset with the student athletes to make them understand that nothing that they had done before, nothing that had ever been done before at school is comparing to what they are doing now at the present time. So making them understand, again, it's something bigger than themselves, that they are there not just for themselves, they're there for the school, they're there for their family, and they're representing something with a lot of history behind it. I think that is kind of the biggest thing. I think coaching lends itself to that. Most coaches have that in their toolbox as something they want to put into the mindset of a student athlete, that they're actually involved in something that is special, that is unique, that's bigger than them, and that the only way they're going to achieve it is with a team mentality. That if you see somebody who needs help, and especially again with novice players, using both sides of their body, right? The left foot, if you're a righty and you're right foot dominant and you're not, that good with the left. So then working with teammates and such, and encouraging them to not run around the ball. And hey, when you got the shot, hey, you can use the left. It might not be a drill into the back of the net, but if you place it properly and you make the goalie fly, that ball has a chance to go in. So making them trying to build confidence in little things that are going to make a big difference. We out of the 12 years, we had 9 league championships, and we ended up, going to the finals in one of the seasons. And unfortunately, we lost to our opponent. But the thing of it is that you give these young people an opportunity to really test themselves in ways that they never dreamed they would have been tested. And I always used to tell the kids, I said, you don't need Jenny Craig, you got me. I said, I'm saving you a lot of money, and I'm teaching you something later on in life. And my midfielders, my midfielders could run.
That might be one of the all-time legendary quotes on this show. But that's great. Okay, let's
I got one other one. I
yeah,
got
what
one
do you
other
got?
one. Yeah, yeah. If you want to walk, join golf.
There you go. Love that. What do you
Nothing wrong
think?
with golf.
What do you think is the best thing that you did in your program as a coach that you were able to get others to adopt by watching it, and or what is the best thing that you've seen one of your coaches do that you've offered to someone else? And I don't want the ethereal culture. I want something that's specific, right? So I usually offer, like in our program, I make our kids hug before practice, after practice, before games, after games, especially when I was coaching the boys for so long, because right, culturally, we're not taught to emote as young men. So I want to try to break down some of those barriers. So what's something that you can offer that has a transformational effect that you would just say, hey, look, this is simple and it's silly, but like this stuff works?
Really, a couple things. Making everything in practice game real is was the most important thing to me. Um, Taking away space on the field and having them work in a confined area and forcing them to get rid of the ball quickly, limit their touches on the ball, especially for novice players that don't have a lot of dribbling skill and ability, but teaching them basics like, passing and receiving uh, the ball and getting rid of the ball quickly. So these little things are things that I emphasized. Preseason, uh, letting the players know, letting my coaches know that seasons are won, success is garnered not in the season, but in the preseason. How hard you work in those preseason training sessions is going to make the difference. Those two things, making practices game real, putting a preseason schedule together where maybe it can be just 2 days a week, three days a week. Emphasize physical conditioning in that time, emphasize basic skills at that time, so that when the season starts and you got that 2 weeks before the first game, that all you're really doing is fine tuning and you're determining which athletes will be, who's going to be a striker, who's going to be a midfielder, who's going to be a defender, who's that crazy girl you're going to put in the goal. These are the things that you kind of dwell upon when you're a coach, and things that if you're going to attribute success to, at least in my mind's eye, it's going to be that how you design a practice to be game real, and putting in the time before the season starts uh, are really the two things I see, Justin, as deciding factors in a program being successful or not.
Yeah, I think those are all great, especially the way you described taking away space, which is basically, the modern version of small-sided games, right? How are you putting constraints into your training to objectively force an outcome rather than trying to bark at them and yell and overteach? It's just like, you know what? I want you to go left. Well, you know what? You can only play on the left half of the court. Now, let's figure this thing out,
Right.
right? So I think those are great suggestions. Let me ask this follow-up. As the AD, you get to be out and about and you get to watch a lot of training. And what are some of the things that you've learned watching other sports that if you were to go back and coach soccer, you would introduce? And the purpose of this, Neil, if I'm being transparent, is I feel like sometimes I'm the last bastion of like the three sport athlete and like trying to keep kids involved in other things.
Mhm.
And I think as a coach, we usually tend to only study those leading our discipline. And there's so much else out there that you can learn from. And so I'm always trying to bring people back to, hey, just because there's not a basketball person here that you can go study, go out there and watch your water polo team practice. There's a ton you can take from them. So what would you offer that you've learned watching other teams and sports and coaches that you would be able to apply were you still coaching, or that you've seen others of your coaches steal and apply?
Believe it or not, Justin, I learned the most out of seeing my teams that got their butts kicked in a season, get offered and just had deplorable seasons when it came to the win loss. Um, what I actually learned from that is in each of those instances, there were no athletes that quit. There were no discipline problems. There were no internal types of situations where the coach had to, uh, had to bench people or anything of that sort. It boiled down to what I saw, what I observed from my coaches was that they made them feel like they were part of something, that they belong, that it gave them a peer group. They would do socials with each other. They would stay after practice and they would listen to music. The coaches would be there. They would stay after practice. They would have pizza. They would stay after practice and they would just enjoy each other's company. These things are little things, but in the specter, they go a long way. They're just culture building, community building, just kind of minor things, but the the um, the capacity, I guess you could say, that it builds in a program is just enormous.
No, I think that's great advice. And I think often as a coach, depending on the age and stage you are in your career, when you start having one of those seasons, right, the emphasis goes on the misery aspect rather than, no, how can we still focus on what sports are intended to do, which is to teach leadership, followership, how to be part of something bigger than yourself, right? How to include and get people to feel like they belong. And I love the fact that you brought that up. Um,
Another thing I would add too is that um, team management has to be a level playing field. The prima donnas, the stars, they cannot be treated one lick differently from the kids on the bench. The kids on the bench are the ones in practice that come in and they perform an adversarial point of view, for scrimmages and preparing for games and so on and so forth. If a coach treats, and this might sound pretty obvious and pretty common sense. But novice coaches, I think there is sometimes the tendency to treat the the star athletes, the better skilled kids differently than the kids on the bench. And to me, in my tenure in coaching, I was harder on the better kids. I was into them more with telling them that they not only had a responsibility to to themselves and the team, but they had a responsibility to the overall culture of the school. And that went to the fact that we needed them to recruit, to get more players in for the following season, and that they needed to be able to share and their skill and their experience and nurture their teammates who weren't necessarily as talented. And once you get a star player to see that, but if a star player starts missing games and starts missing practices and coming late and so on and so forth, and that player is allowed to play, what happens is people quit. You know, well, Shirley came and, she busted her butt every practice and was never late on time. And then, Maria here, she shows up 20 minutes late twice a week and, almost misses the bus, every time we have a game, puts stress on everybody. So whether whether it's laps or it's a contract or whatever you're putting that student athlete through, who is not acting appropriately, it has to be consistent. It has to be the same level of discipline applied to the star players, has to be applied to the reserve players as well.
For sure. And I think that's always a challenge, right? How are you intentionally, I wouldn't say holding the standard is the challenge. I think how are you intentional about relationship building with everybody on the team, right? The bigger your team is, the harder that is. The smaller your team is, right? There's natural inclinations to who aligns with each other and how you spend time. But I think ultimately, how do we keep that front of mind as we're coaching and we're leading, and that the more included people can feel, then you're going to have those experiences regardless of what the record is. Let me go here, and I'm curious about this both from a coaching lens and a administrative lens. But what this is a Tim Ferriss thought. I don't know if you ever listened to Tim, but what are you, he asked this question about, do people have a favorite failure? And mine is more along the lines of, what are some some times when you have failed and fumbled that were transformational learning moments for you that you've then been able to apply over your career, especially as it is now sunsetting officially. What are some of those that you can offer to others that were, not this is the moment that my career ended, but this is actually the moment when I was able to turn a corner because I was open to the lesson that failure had to offer?
Definitely, it would add the bend that I had a tendency when I first started coaching and when I first started dealing with, because it's a challenge to deal with adults. I mean, it's way more difficult to deal with adults. I used to throw a template over things and say, well, this is how I'm going to do it with everybody in this situation. Being able to again read people. I think I always had a pretty good way of doing that, but there was this point in time where I was being very rigid, and again, my own worst enemy was that material in between my ears. I was so fixated without opening up my eyes and seeing that once in a while the box has an outside that we can traverse and that we can play around with. So I think when it came to being an athletic director, emphasizing our department handbook, problematic coaches, and I'm just going to put it that way, they were problematic. They had to be constantly reminded. They had to be counseled and tutored and have literally physically the handbook opened and shown to them and reiterated at the preseason coaches meetings what the policies were that they had to follow, especially locker room supervision. Because I think as well as I can, if a locker room turns into a clubhouse environment, it can be the most dangerous place on campus. It can be the most austere and the most just simply a place where things can happen that are unimaginable and just horrific. So that kind
The
of thing.
whole class on that at the NIAAA that you can take to read all the terrible things that have happened.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And I gotta say, we were blessed at Belmont. But I did ad nauseam drill that into the department. I really did. And then going back to coaching, but getting the best out of players too, is just knowing the buttons to push and how to push them. Right. Because some kids, right, you can treat them like a drill instructor treats recruits and you get the most out of them. Some, it's like a light switch. You try to get in their face and scream and yell, and it's like a light switch, turns them off, and you don't get anything out of them. In fact, you get pushback. So learning about people, understanding about people, watching your words, because one word can be can destroy, can just be so damaging. But watching the way that you phrase things, uh, checking your personal feelings at the door if you've had that bad day. I think that was something I had to learn early on too, because I do wear my feelings on my sleeve, and getting the personal life aside and putting it in a compartment, and getting out there on the field, or getting in there with meetings with coaching staff requires, personal things that are going on in life to be compartmentalized. And I think that's part of being a professional, and a mindset of saying that, no one forced me to do this. I did this because I selected the career. I chose to be here. And if anything goes wrong, I have to take responsibility for that. So if it happened at home, when, my wife was sore at me about something, or if it happened at work, where I had a miserable experience with a student in the classroom, I have to put that aside when I get into the field with athletes, when I get into the office with adults. It's a whole different way of operating, and using the compartments, jump back and forth in between the compartments to make it all happen.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point right there in that snippet on is how are you compartmentalizing the things that are in your life so that you can show up as your best self? Because a lot of times, hell, I would say more often than not, we are all bringing external baggage to whatever group setting we're in, both us and the athletes. And I think the I don't know if there's a cliche or whatnot, but like we never know what people are bringing with them. And when we don't even take the opportunity to consider that, whatever we're saying is landing on deaf ears. And you made the comment that you used to try to apply a template and you realize pretty quick like that doesn't work. And we need to figure out how to meet people where they are. Um,
I'd say, especially with urban kids, Justin, because a lot of times it's just mom by herself taking care of everything. There's challenges. I coached you know, girls for 12 years. Often they had to watch younger siblings. Sometimes, coach, I need to go pick up my little brother down the street at Union Elementary School. I'll be right back. And then we'd have the little brother there sitting down on the bench, while practice was going on, until practice was over, and then they went home together. So there's a lot of things that come with an environment, with a setting, that you also have to be sensitive to. The culture, literally the culture that you're dealing with. In our case, a lot of Central Americans, and a lot of beliefs that girls, women, um, shouldn't be involved in sports, let alone, the number one sport in the world, the most macho sport in the world, soccer. So those were some things to overcome at times.
Yeah, I can imagine. And I think the takeaway, if you're listening and willing to hear it, is how are you exploring, learning, and understanding the culture of the place you're at so that you can best help those student athletes be successful? And if you don't, if you're not willing to understand those things, then everyone's just going to be frustrated. And I think that's the great takeaway from what you just shared. Let me ask this in regards to um, your role as the AD, because you've done that for the longest. And as a self-described, what'd you call yourself earlier? The end of the baby boomer generation, a pencil and paper guy, which is fine. But what would you say is the best tool you have recently adopted that you would love to offer to other people that are out there trying to do that job as the AD?
Yeah. Yeah. I found the greatest question you've asked me all day, Justin. I found that text messaging way, way better than email. Way, way better. And Most of my coaches are millennials, and that was like a fish in water. So when information needed to be disseminated, I had formulated these different messages, and I can go back and I can cut and paste and change dates and change times, or just change the structure. But that might sound like a little thing, but if there's anybody in my vintage who's still out there and in the profession and haven't embraced text messaging, I gotta tell you. And my successor, who is of my vintage, but he's hanging on. He's a few years behind me. He's gonna retire in the next 3 to 5 years. He has begun to adopt it. So it's a simple little thing.
I love that. And here's what I'm going to say. Knowing your audience is as important, if not more important, to whatever message you're trying to deliver. And I talk ad nauseum to people over the years about how are you, Neil La Sala, training the people that are going to interact with you as to the best way to get your attention. Right. And so I offer that in the same way in which I joke, like I've trained certain people to do X if they want me to respond. And it's not in a manipulative way, but how are we all setting up our lives, right? So I don't have notifications on my phone for anything but text messages. Yeah. So I have to actively go and hit the email app to go check emails. Email is not an efficient way to get a hold of me if you want a timely response. But, right, that is an efficient tool for audience X or audience Y. So I think you're embracing of the text message, super important, but it could be as simple as Snapchat or Instagram or these other mediums that are now out there for the millennials, right? To figure out how are you getting the attention of your intended audience. So I think that's the takeaway. And that's such a good message, Coach. Thanks for bringing that up. I'm going to pivot to this question. And I don't want to go back to kind of like, what would you do over, or what would you tell your younger self? But what I'm curious about is how you are, and then this goes to what you said earlier, right? My biggest hurdle was my own brain and getting out of my own way of, well, this is how I was. This is what I would expect if I was being coached. And I was just talking with my football coach about this, which was like, look, man, I get that that's your wiring. And if it was important to you, this is how you would do it. It's clear that that's not how these kids are thinking. So how are you now meeting them where they are? What advice do you have for that? What have you seen that's successful, right? This isn't like if you had to start over, but like, what do you have to offer now after being in this business for 40 years about the way things are shifting and how people on the front end should be adopting some of these changes?
Open-mindedness for one, Justin, being able to say that I don't have all the answers. We talked about this before in another podcast, there's a million ways to screw up in what we do. There's this inevitable, and it's a humbling job being a coach. It's a humbling job being an athletic director. We have hurdles that are sometimes they seem insurmountable, but at the end of the day, when we break it down and we slow down and we realize that there's resources out there, professional development opportunities like the NIAAA, like we have at the CSADA conference, like at the National Federation of High School Sports, and all of those outstanding classes that are available there, the LTC classes from NIAAA, the designations, the RAA, the CAA, the CMA, CMAA. These things, again, they're little things, but they give us capacity to build up the tools for the toolbox that we need, and just to simply, for lack of a better way of putting it, steal from our brother and sister athletic directors, steal their ideas. Yeah, like my handbook, my department handbook, plagiarized to the hilt, but I updated it and did some things to it to make it applicable to my setting. But that's right. It's I guess you say it's the most sincere form of flattery when you borrow and steal from somebody else. And when I say steal, I mean it in literally just, taking it and using it and modifying it so that we can apply it to our situation. There's just a lot of people out there, I think, that are they hesitate to uh, to embrace professional development, and there's an arrogance about them when it comes to wanting to get better at something. And I've seen some of these with athletic directors that I've worked with over the years, certainly seen it with some of my coaches in my department. And I think identifying that with coaches and sharing it with them in their evaluations at the end of each season, emphasizing that there's a lot out there to learn, and it's just not going to fall into our laps unless we go looking for it.
Yeah, and I love that you brought that up, and you're wearing your CSADA shirt. And for those coaches that are listening, it's the California State Athletic Directors Association. Neil's the president-elect, meaning he's coming on board, would you say, April of 25? And you serve a 2-year term, I think. But it's our State Athletic Director Association. There's also a national one that we're part of, but these exist in every sport, right? So if you're a basketball coach, are you part of the NABC? Are you going to conferences? And there's a million excuses. There's a million reasons like that we find to not do these things. I just started getting involved a couple years ago, and the network alone makes that time commitment worthwhile. So if you need a reason to get involved outside of your program, developing your network ultimately is going to help you become better at what you do. What are your thoughts on that, Coach?
By all means, and I don't know if the viewers are aware of this, and I'm just going to bring it up right now that the host of this podcast is the California State Athletic Director of the Year, Justin, and he had displayed to the board, to his fellow ADs, a level of excellence, a level of commitment, a level of making other people better than they are. And this is what organizations do that we belong to, whether you're a coach and it's through the NFHS coaches association, whether you're an athletic administrator, CSADA, NIAAA, doesn't matter. We cannot rely on our own experiences and think to get better unless we go outside and start really pursuing opportunities to get better. And you go to some of these clinics and some of these workshops, and in all honesty, Justin, I think, and you might agree with me, 90% of it can not be applicable. But then what happens is there's that light bulb, right? There's that moment when you pick up one freaking thing that made the whole trip across the United States worth it. Whether having, a captain's club, where you have all the team captains, be kind of like a governing board or decision-making board, whether you have, again, my favorite thing to dwell on, the department handbook, where you're taking ideas and things to implement into your own department's ideology and way of conducting business. Drills that you never thought would be significant drills until you saw them displayed at a clinic or on an online coaching class. It's taking your awareness level to a place where you never thought it would be, or you didn't have any knowledge of where you could even find it in the first place. So this is about growth. This is about using resources, putting those resources into play for the benefit of the boys and girls. That's all it is.
100%. And I would offer this as well, because there's always hurdles and constraints that we invent or that they're real, right? It's like time. So I never went to the National AD Convention conference until this year because I'm a basketball coach. It's right in the middle of basketball season. We host a tournament that weekend. And this year I was like, I'm going. And you know what? We survived. I also feel like if you can't make that commitment, like, and you're, let's say me, you're a basketball coach, call the coach at your rival school and go take them to lunch. Like, go pick their brain, start there at a small level, because if we're asking our athletes to improve, how are we improving, right? And I think that's the biggest takeaway is ultimately, how are you growing as a learner? And, you know, if it's on YouTube, fantastic. But at the end of the day, people matter, relationships matter. How are you growing that so that you can help your athletes? And if you want to be selfish about it, how are you building a relationship with the other 6 members in your league so that when you're trying to promote your athletes to colleges, you now have 6 more people that may have a connection for that kid that you didn't have before you had those lunches. So I think that's a great thing to point out, Coach. Appreciate you taking the time to be with us today. And the last question I always have is, what have you most recently changed your mind on? And I steal this from Dave Stachowiak. He runs a podcast called Coaching for Leaders. And I'm just always curious from a growth mindset. Like, I used to be over here and dug in, and now I'm over here, and here's why. So I always like to float that question as a way to self-assess how we're growing as an individual. You already mentioned text messaging. You can't use that again. It doesn't have to be coaching related. It can be relational. It can be about the world. But what have you most recently changed your mind on?
Yeah. Yeah. Effective July 1st, I'm a retired school teacher. I was a teacher first, and I was a coach, and I was an athletic director second. I will say that the thing I most recently changed my mind on, for sure, it is that things can get done and will get done eventually in some way, shape, or form. Drilling in onto a timeline sometimes becomes important. Giving yourself some lead time into a deadline, giving yourself some preparation into for example, scheduling, not scheduling long, non-league games. There's a little art involved in that. You want to definitely do some research on who the opponents were going to be, because you want to have somebody of equivalent caliber or maybe a little bit better to kind of push. So I think as a retired person and putting all these things in perspective, yeah, doing your homework, understanding that your timeline is got a degree of flexibility in it so that you can get the most out of it, and just understanding that the time that you put into something is going to definitely have a positive outcome, because your heart is in what you do. Because your heart is in what you do, you for sure are not going to see it fail. So I think in many things in life, again, we're our own worst enemy, but not letting time be an adversary, but that time be a navigational tool, let time be a guide so that we can get things done and not, feel a lot of stress and anxiety.
No, I love that. And I think we talked about that a little bit earlier in regards to what's important, what's urgent, how are you prioritizing things and setting yourself up for success. Well, anyway, Coach, appreciate you being on. We knocked 2 out in a little bit over an hour and a half. Looking forward to getting these out there in the universe for people to learn from you.
Good to go.